Hello, and welcome to the 2020 Alexandria Film Festival, featuring more than 40 great films. While we're virtual this year, we're so glad you've tuned in to learn more about the films in this year's program. My name is Merrill, and I'm a volunteer with the Film Festival, and I'm pleased to serve as moderator for this Q&A session with filmmaker Kacey Cox, who's the director and screenwriter of Finding Manny, as well as co-producers Manny Drukier and Jan Jekielek. And I'm particularly honored to host this Q&A because I, in my day job, work at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge our major sponsors. It isn't every business that supports the arts, so please join us in thanking them and patronizing their businesses. So thanks go to Sunrise Senior Living Old Town, Burke and Herbert Bank, Connection Newspapers, Visit Alexandria, Alexandria Living, Alexandria Commission for the Arts, and Alexandria Hyundai. So let's turn to Finding Manny. And my first questions are for you, Cindy. You're one of Manny's daughters and you're featured in the film. And I was wondering if you would tell us a little bit how your parents have been doing since the film and since COVID.
Yeah, well, they're extremely happy that the film is finally out, kept being asked continuously. So that's a good milestone. And, you know, they're doing all right in COVID. It's a bit, you know, lonely because actually none of us have been able to visit at all during this time. And thank goodness for this technology that, you know, at least we can have video visits, but it's not easy for anyone.
That's true. It's been hard for everyone, but I'm glad to hear that they're doing well. So can you tell us how it feels to see on film your father's story? It's such a personal story, obviously for him and for your entire family to get to witness what your father experienced. So how does it feel to see it on film and see it out in the world?
It feels great because yeah, you know, it's a whole process to get to this point. And of course, you know, Jan and I were, you know, involved with Kacey in the whole, you know, process of making it. And it was, you know, many different films along the way. And we're so happy with the results. And one of the main things is we feel like it just captures everyone's personality perfectly. Like it's extremely authentic. And we've had, you know, family members and friends telling us, you know, they've learned things about Manny's story also, you know, obviously that they didn't know. And I heard one feedback that they were just like, yeah, I just felt like it was so precious to be, you know, a fly on the wall to be able to go with you on the journey. And you know, you saw a bit of how it came about. I mean, it's not normal to have, you know, the whole process filmed from the very, very beginning, right? From looking in this box of photos to the Skype call with Anna, and it just happened that way. So it's pretty amazing to see from start to finish this whole journey on screen and, you know, get to do the past and the present. And yeah, it feels great.
One of the things that was really meaningful to me was how you and your siblings shared how much you learned about your father, how little he told you, I guess, when you were children growing up about his experiences in the Holocaust. And do you feel like you really got to know your father as a different person or a more full person as a result of making the film?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially because it was such a rare opportunity to be able to just continually have those conversations. So like growing up, you know, there would be like little snippets here and there. If he was in the mood, he would say something that you never felt like you could kind of probe further. And it was just like licensed to constantly talk about it, you know, for this whole time. And to ask him, you know, I think of the film, I think there's the moment where I asked, you know, was this camp worse than, you know, the one before? And I'd always wondered how much it was in his head. How much did he think about it? I had no idea, you know, my whole life growing up. Plus, actually, the siblings, we all discovered that there were different things that each other knew that we didn't realize. We all assumed we knew the same things, but that wasn't the case. So that was pretty interesting also. So yeah, definitely. And, you know, you heard them say on the film too, you know, when we were growing up, we never thought to ourselves, oh, this is nothing compared to what dad went through, because we didn't know that. And so then just kind of looking back at our lives through his eyes, I think it gave us an opportunity to do that. So yeah, it was and just amazing that all of us got to be there together and go through it together. Yeah, pretty special family experience all around.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. So Kacey, I'd like to turn to you as the director and screenwriter. How did you first encounter Manny's story?
It happened through a phone call I got from Cindy. I believe I was traveling at the time, and I got a phone call coming in from Cindy, and Jan and I were colleagues, and we had an existing relationship, and so I knew Cindy was his wife, but I don't ever recalling getting a direct call from Cindy. So I picked up the call, and she said, "Hey, I'm gonna be coming into town, coming to Toronto to visit my father, and he's going to be opening a box that he hasn't shown the family yet, and this box contains, I wasn't sure if you knew clearly specifically what it contains, Cindy, but you just wanted you saw a potential opportunity that we should possibly film this. You had some sort of your instincts might have been firing that, hey, this might be something we should film. So you had asked me, I'm talking to you, Cindy, now, could you come over and film this moment where, I'm going to be hanging out with my dad, and he's going to be opening this cigar box of photos from the Holocaust time. So I said, sure. It was more of a favor. I said, yeah, I'll do the favor. And when I got back in town a few days later, I contacted a friend of mine who's actually ended up being the DP, the director of photography on this film. His name is Arik. I say, hey, we're gonna go visit my friend Cindy and Jan, and you want to come with me? Bring a camera. So we showed up with cameras, and that I didn't know what to expect. I just was doing a favor, and we get there, and just like Cindy said, Manny, her dad, brings out this old cigar box with photos, and he starts going through it. And this was the first time that Cindy, her sister Lori was there, Manny's wife Frida was there, and this is the first time that they're seeing these photos. And for me, yeah, it was a bit of a I didn't know what to expect. And the photos were photos from the Holocaust time. Some of them were pretty hard to look at. Dead bodies stacked up on top of each other. And that was a bit of a shock for me to kind of experience. And that's kind of how it started. It started from this cigar box at Manny's house that he's showing the family for the first time.
That's a great story. So Kacey, how familiar were you with Holocaust history before making this film?
I thought that I was, I would consider myself somewhat knowledgeable. I mean, in school, in grade school, we all had to read The Diary of Anne Frank. And I believe that would have been my first, at least in education, my first interaction with the Holocaust. And so, I carried that with me from grade school. And then later on in life, you watch movies, you watch Schindler's List, you watch The Pianist, or, other movies that were made. And so I thought I knew a bit. But when I went on this trip now with Manny and the family to make this film, we spent the whole trip together. For us was at least 15 days. And one of the places we stopped in was Auschwitz. And Auschwitz, when I got there, I could feel this sort of presence of the sort of tragedy and the sorrow that, took place there. So, it was, before I had this sort of intellectual concept of the Holocaust, but going to Auschwitz and also going with Manny and his family, I actually kind of got to feel, obviously it's quite different. So I'm different. I'm not a relative, but I was able to kind of feel it more on an emotional level. So that's kind of like my understanding of the Holocaust.
Yeah, Thank you. That difference between an emotional connection and an intellectual understanding is really important. Why, some people can say, well, why is it important to learn about the Holocaust now? It was, it was a long, long time ago. It was an ocean away. Why, as the filmmaker, why do you feel it's important for people to learn about the history from the perspective of someone who lived it?
Well, there's a couple. There's a couple reasons that, for me at least, the first one is, from the personal story of the the character or the subject that I'm telling. So Manny had this personal experience, and which, Holocaust aside, was a pretty tragic experience, but ultimately a triumphant personal journey, throughout his life. And to me, that was like, it's still significant of one person going through something like this. The other side of it is like, okay, this happened to millions of people. And so this wasn't just an isolated thing that took place with one person. This took place with, and it's not just millions of people, a specific group of people that were targeted in this way. And one of the things you hear often is, never forget, and what does that mean, to never forget? It happened decades ago, but this is still relevant in my time, in our time right now. You see this type of treatment with many different groups out there right now. And so I think there's a relevance, a currency. And this is not to discount, the people of the Jewish faith, but that was important. But even today, what's happening in many situations around the world, you see near the end of the film, we touched on what was happening with Falun Gong in China. Here you have a group of tens of millions of people who are being persecuted for their spirituality, and there isn't, how do I say this? It's something that's talked about, but there's not enough being said about it. And so that's where, to give you those two reasons, there is a social currency with the Holocaust with today.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you quoted, you included this quote in the film, but history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I think that's partly what you're getting at there, Kacey. And so Jan, I'd like to turn to you as producer of the film, and apologies for my cat making an appearance here. But Jan, could you tell us why, from your perspective, it was important to make the film now?
Wow, so many things to say, and thanks for organizing this. By the way, this is a really wonderful conversation so far. Well, okay, so for starters, I'm a Pole. I'm actually Polish Canadian, right? First generation. And for Poles, it's the whole relationship with the Jewish people is a very odd relationship, because this was a giant population in Poland pre-World War II, right? It was just a normal part of life. And for most people in Poland right now, because the population of Jews is so tiny, it's purely a historical thing. So there's this fascination with Jewish culture, Jewish heritage. I myself, the trip we took to Auschwitz, that was the 7th time I had been there. It's something I'm, very, very interested in personally. So there's this kind of relevancy there, right? To kind of bring it to people like, I guess, Poles and Canadians and so forth. Just the history is very critical, because the survivors are not going to be with us much longer now, right? Manny is frankly one of the last survivors. He just had his birthday. He's 92, right? So getting these stories while we still can, I don't want to sound morbid about it, but I think is incredibly important because it's kind of our last chance. And it's the most documented example of genocide that exists, right? And these genocides, as Kacey mentioned, this is the other piece, right? These genocides are things which are like, for example, with the Falun Gong, it's called a slow genocide, right? Where there's been this order to eradicate these people. You know, there's this whole forced organ harvesting bit, which was validated by the China Tribunal, I think just this year again, you know, and it takes so long for people to actually believe. During World War II, there was a Pole, this Polish nobleman, Jan Karski, he actually broke into concentration camps, saw what was happening, right? Got out, went to the UK, told people, went to the US, and I think there's that famous line, right, from, I think it was Frankfurter, he was I forget his role right now, but he says, you know, I don't think that this man was lying, but I'm saying that I was unable to believe him. And it's just the idea of genocidal behavior. Most people just don't want to believe that people can behave this way, right? But the reality is people behave this way and they're behaving this way today. And some of them are people or that we interact with, you know, we have trade relationships with and so forth. So the relevancy of the Holocaust to today, in my mind, is incredibly important because it tells us this is not just history. This is not something that just happened once. This is something that can happen again and is happening again. And we need to learn from that and we need to stop it.
That's very well said. And one of the lessons we teach at the Holocaust Museum in DC is that the unimaginable is possible. And that's what the Holocaust teaches us. And I'd just like to close by asking you, Jan, what was one of the biggest challenges you encountered in making the film?
This is a tough question for me because in my mind, the whole film was kind of like a magic or a little miracle in itself, you know. When all this was happening, you know, this whole situation started brewing. Kacey came over, he brought Arek. I knew that Arek was a great DP, right? Did great work. They took some incredible footage, right?
And he's Polish.
Well, he happens to be Polish too, which is extra appropriate, right? Then Kacey happens to be around for that phone call, right? When Anna Andlauer, you know, that works out, right? So at that point, we're like, what we have to do some. Kacey, I know him already to be an incredible fly on the wall documentary filmmaker. He made this amazing short film called The Crown. You should check it out sometime if you can. Kacey, I don't know where you can view it at the moment, but you should share that. But so I knew that he can do this kind of work incredibly well, right? And then so I was talking about it with my friend who runs NTD Canada, this new network, and you know, he just heard about this. He said, hey, you know what, I think I still have a little bit of money left, you know. So suddenly, you know, basically we had a film that was, you know, funded to some significant degree, and so I was like, how, this doesn't happen, right? Like who does this happen to, right? So, you know, we looked at each other, we're incredibly busy, but no, we have to do this, right? So it was kind of, you know, it was just basically this kind of magical thing. I think the toughest part, frankly, was putting the film together afterwards because it took a lot longer than expected. And we had multiple variations. We had several different films that were built before we had a version of the one that you see now pretty early on, but we tried some completely different things. Kacey came, you know, because we wanted to not just to do, you know, sort of we wanted to do something that could really last, that could really affect people, that could really, you know, sort of, and also bring it into the present day, right? That was so important to us. So I think that was probably the toughest, was just kind of working through to get back. The magic appeared, then we had another version, the magic disappeared, and we had to kind of find the magic again. And, you know, thankfully we had Kacey, we had Garrett, you know, an amazing editor, who's working closely with us. And in the end, you know, just everyone working really closely together. I mean, you know, Kacey just managed to put something incredibly brilliant out. And I'm just so proud of it, frankly.
Well, thank you so much. So clearly finding the magic was an important component of finding Manny. And you know, yes. I'm sorry that this is all the time we have together, but I do want to thank Kacey Cox, the writer and director of Finding Manny, as well as Jan Jekielek, the producer, and Cindy Drukier, co-producer and daughter of Manny. Thank you so much for participating in this Q&A session about the film Finding Manny. And to our audience, I want to encourage you not to miss the other films and Q&A sessions that we have lined up over the course of the film festival. And please feel free to share your thoughts on Twitter using the hashtag AlexFilmFest about any of the films that you see. Tickets are still available to all of our online showcases. You can find them at www.alexfilmfest.com. And you will have 3 days to finish watching the film after you press play. So thank you again. Thank you to my Q&A participants. And thank you all for supporting the Alexandria Film Festival.